morning. The global supply chain is a mess, and that is an understatement. Chaotic. There is a shortage of just about everything. Semiconductors, wheat, palm oil, fertilizers, and the list goes on. And if you're buying a pair of shoes made in Shanghai, it will get to LA in about 2 months, and that's double the time it took before. And that's forcing governments and companies to rethink, reimagine global trade and supply chains. So how did we get here? Mr. Ahmad, is it because that supply chains have been so intertwined, so connected, that they've become so fragile? Is that the reason why we're experiencing such difficulties right now?
Yeah, thank you, Linda, for inviting me to attend with you today. Actually, it's a combination of things. If you think about it, the COVID also contribute a lot. The shutdown, the slowdown. Even with the shutdown, you have like Shanghai city, which contributing more than 10% to the global international trade for China, and although the port is working and the airport, but in a slow, way, in a way, which, interrupt things. You have the inflation also added. You have the Ukraine situation added to the story, of course. You have the food price inflation impacted. You have also the sudden pressure which came after COVID, because the growth, it's growing very fast, everyone back to normal business in a way, and that put a huge pressure on the logistic value chain. Some of the company doesn't have any new vessels to put in to deal with the demand. And it's become a supply-demand issue, which will take a few months, maybe, more than this. But, there are different analysts. So it's a different thing. Even the consumer behavior, contribute to this. It's the U.S. consumer, spending has raised by 18%, according to different studies. So different, elements contribute to the current situation, unfortunately.
Minister Matiangi, we know that if you take a look at Apple's iPhone, for instance, all the components come from 200 suppliers across 42 countries in 6 continents. Is that a boon or a bane if you take a look at the supply chain ecosystem?
Thank you for having me. It's a bane because if you need 200 parts to put together an item or an equipment, it means then a disruption that will stop the supply of one item will stop the entire supply of those items across the board. The reason why we have suffered a lot of disruption as a result of COVID-19 and now, of course, the challenges in Ukraine is because the world was not used to departing from traditional methods of production so that we focus on challenges that we could actually face, such as we have found ourselves in. The truth of the matter is that none of us was prepared for what happened. So that, for example, our governments were not ready to shed off some of the bureaucratic challenges so that business would be hastened and would be made faster. Secondly, many governments, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, maintained a very old red tape system of supporting business. In some parts of the South, solid relationships between government and business do not exist. And the gaps that are in most cases mediated by long red tape and bureaucracy increased the challenges or worsened the disruption as a result of COVID-19 and so on. We hope that we have now learned lessons on a number of things, and I hope during this session we will go to some of those lessons we have learned on how to sort our problems out, because if there was anything, the challenges we faced as a result of COVID-19 and now the war in Ukraine have introduced a whole new world order and a whole new reality in terms of, one, supply chain management, but most importantly, in terms of relationships between government and business, because it has redefined the way in which governments deal with business forever, and only governments that will change their attitude, only governments that will reorient their perspectives and engagement with business are going to succeed to serve their people. But governments that will remain steeped in the bureaucracy and long red tape and so on, all those inefficiencies are going to worsen our situation as we move forward. So time is here for us to draw the lessons from this experience and see how best governments can be of value to business and how business and government can work together in the interest and in the service of their people. I hope during this session we'll spend a bit of time on the lessons that we have learned and some of these, because we don't know when there's going to be another pandemic. I mean, we have been dealing with COVID-19, we are dealing with the challenges in Ukraine, we don't know what the next challenge is going to be, which means that time is here for all of us to rethink government-business relations, to rethink supply chain management, to rethink supply chain realities, and many other things that we need to do. Those of us in the South discovered, for example, that we are very far away from the world manufacturing hubs in China, in South Korea, in some of the countries in East Asia. Time is here for us to look at how we can support decentralization of manufacturing hubs so that when we get into a problem next time, we are not all dependent on what's happening in China, we are not all dependent on what's happening in South Korea and so on. We can build capacities and deal with environments such as the Gulf where we are today and see how best, because we are closer to the Gulf than we are to China and we are closer to the Gulf than we are to South Korea.
We'll pick up on the new realities and how the governments can work with business slightly later. For ASEAN, Ahmad, I mean, you're pretty much at the heart of trade, looking at logistics. What were the issues and what remain the issues today?
Well, thank you. If you allow me first just to comment on, on the question to His Excellency around, I think having 200 parts suppliers to a product, is it good or bad? I think, to be honest, from my perspective, I think it's good for the global economy. We are where we are for a reason. We're having multiple sourcing from different parts of the globe to make a product. That's because of certain reasons which you know, whether it's labor, whether it's technology, whether it's expertise. And I think, in my opinion, that is good for the global economy going forward as well. Still, people talk about shoring, near-shoring, multiple sourcing, and decentralization. We talk a lot about in different forums about decentralization of supply chain. They see that as a solution as a response to the current pandemic and what happened in the last 2 years. I think it'll be, as much as we love decentralization, it'll be a multiple sourcing reality in the future. That's how it look like. So we're going to still have 200 parts suppliers across the globe, because I believe that's very good for the global economy as a global citizens ourselves. In ASEAN, I think I always say back home, COVID was a very good test for the resilience of how we respond as a logistics entities ourselves, whether it's in Oman or elsewhere. We responded very well, because I remember in March in 2020, there was a panic. It was almost like it was going to happen. Are we going to be, completely isolated from the globe? Because as we know, in this part of the world, we import a lot of stuff, so we don't make our own stuff. So we rely still on the global trade to come to the region. So there was a panic mode. What's going to happen? In March, I think, responded very well, and I think it was a test for our resilience as a global, as entities. Luckily, none of the ports in the region closed down, and that's also a testimony of the very good infrastructure we have in the region, in Oman and also in the GCC, world-class infrastructure, which helped us a lot in terms of managing the pandemic issues. And also we had the systems behind it. The systems, also the people. So we managed to weather that storm of closing ports. That was not the case in some other countries in the world, which is actually causing the major chaos now in the global supply chain. Be it China, be it the US, the two major economies shut down. The ports went into chaos until now. So that didn't happen in our case. So that helped us a lot in terms of resilience. Also, what we did, I think, thanks to our agility, decision-making, also taking a lead rather than being reactive, we bought assets at a very high price at that time. And it was, I remember it was almost irrational to buy assets at a price that only was half a price 3 months ago. We bought it then at double price, but we knew we had to respond. We knew we had to ensure that supply chain continues. So we bought the assets, and in Oman, all the supermarkets, all the hypermarkets were full at any one point in time. And in fact, because of the new routes we started, and new supply points, the products, particularly fruits and vegetables, were around 17% cheaper in the country. So I think it's combination of hard infrastructure, technology, soft infrastructure, having the right people on it, and also agility in decision making, and also having the financial means to do it. I think that helps a lot in terms of the resilience. That can be said across the globe, unfortunately. You know?
I want to pick up on that. Ahmad talked about response. What should be the immediate response? So far, we've seen about $9 trillion worth of inventories being stockpiled. It's about security. We've seen the likes of President Biden saying, you know what, we're not going to rely on China so much. Let's look elsewhere, look at onshoring. Is that the right responses, Minister Ahmad?
So, in my opinion, it should take different levels. You know, it's governments, you know, collectively, and the international organization should, you know, ease the policy here to ease the goods transportation and the trade logistic, you know, here. Definitely, you know, customs authority and different port authorities and airport, all together with the airlines and all different companies, should take a different measurement to make it, you know, going, you know, in more smooth way. Because, you know, as we indicate and as we mentioned, a lot of stocks already in the middle of the seas. So, in addition to policies intervention, in addition to different measurement, I think, you know, there is no way that we can rely on a normal international trade so far without building a local storage capacity. As my friend here, you know, said, you don't know what is the next, or when is the next pandemic should come. So I think different countries should have a sort of ability and capacity to store, especially food and important logistic things on the ground or in very close, maybe you come regional, you know, storage, you know, instead of global storage. But I think, you know, this case study now with what's happened with the pandemic and the consequence, and you have the price inflation, which, you know, led to, you know, this kind of thinking.
Minister Matiangi, is it about identifying what is strategic to the country?
Yes, and much more than that, because I agree with the decision that President Biden has taken, and it has also pointed out one thing. Globalization and in the neoliberal environment that we find ourselves in, where we are talking about, especially some countries in the South and even in Asia, talking about, you know, democracies and so on, led also to the retreat of government. You know, if there's any lesson we have learned from this pandemic, is that governments cannot stay away from business, and government cannot only do regulatory work and write regulations and so on. Governments have got to be directly involved. In every one of the cases that you've had where decisions were taken that were successful to save populations and create resilience, governments were involved directly. In my country, for example, the president brought in the army to do some work they have not done before, you know, to reform the port, to work on a railway line and so on, to support movement of goods and services. We have seen the US do that. We have seen several other governments do that, which is a call to the fact that governments cannot retreat now from supply chain capacities and then building local resilience infrastructure as you move forward. So as we get out of this, I don't even know whether we have actually gotten out of this pandemic for sure. One critical lesson that we must learn is looking inside, building local capacities. If those local capacities include seeing what it is that you can manufacture within, seeing what it is that you can stock in preparation for any challenge next time, seeing what skills that you are able to build in your country and in your environment, now is the time to do that. For many of us from the South, for example, we learned that very basic things like PPEs cannot be available in times of danger. And you know the debate that we have been having about vaccine apartheid and so on. Now, Many countries in the south, including Kenya, are building capacities to do fill and finish so that we are able to keep vaccines and so on and prepare ourselves. We're not going to depend on the north when there's a crisis because we don't know the one that's coming next time on how we will manage ourselves. And therefore, I think for all governments, and then especially those of us from the south, time is here for us to look inside and see what kind of capacities we can build for ourselves to safeguard ourselves in the event there is a pandemic. The old theories about business being left alone, government doing own regulation, supply chain management being left to private sector and so on, quite frankly don't hold. And that is the new reality that we have to deal with. So it's about governments looking at what it is they can do, and governments not shying away from getting involved directly. I mean, the US government is summoning the army to do certain things, to decongest the port in Florida and California and so on and so forth. So we too need to look at what it is that we can do, build local resilience, build local capacities as much as we can, so that we prepare for the challenge next time.
There is a sense that onshoring is the way to go, but onshoring also leads to, I guess, systems, processes being repeated, and that leads to higher costs. Your take on it?
I don't believe onshoring is a solution, personally, because onshoring comes also, even for the economy like yours, because then you'll be hit with the reality of inflation, of capacity, and which is not easy to get. I mentioned earlier, we are in this situation in terms of the global economy, in terms of how products are made, because of we are for a reason. And that's the reason because of the capacity of the cost of things. I think the U.S. economy enjoyed low inflation, low interest rate for a long period of time because of the possibility of getting these products at a cheaper price from different economies. Look at, for example, what happened now in China lockdown. I think some companies moved to Vietnam. Right? Is Vietnam going to be the next? I don't believe so. I think it just is correct itself. What we need to do, I think all of us, we need to look at this multiple sourcing concept where we need to fix the issues of supply chain. One of the issues of a fixed supply chain is the infrastructure, across the globe. That has to be fixed. I think the countries are realizing. Also policies. A lot of policy, some of the chaos we are in because of the policies. Shut down the port. Why do you shut down the port? You need to look at, or shut down the airport. You need to look at differently. You need to have this continuity, business continuity mechanisms. So onshoring is a far-fetched reality, to be honest. And I think multiple sourcing is the way forward. And probably there are a lot of efforts now across countries, to collaborate more. And maybe one of the advantages of this pandemic, I think countries are cooperating a lot more now. Economies are cooperating a lot more because that's because we need you can never get all the capacity you need in a country, and you can never get all the. Otherwise, you're going to hit me with this inflation and lack of the capability.
Minister?
Yeah. So I agree with Abdurrahman here. I think you need. When I said ensuring, it's not about only manufacturing. Of course, any country can have capacity for their basic needs. However, when I said, to have the logistically to be ready to store more and to have your capacity, to have for longer term, for example, the food supply, the food storage. You have production, you have processing, and you have storage. Some countries should have the capability to keep the food for a longer term, for example, in a strategic location, and that's including all logistic things around port, airport, and other infrastructure around it. So, but at the end, global supply chain is facing a lot of issues, and this is not easy to sort it. Even from the price, because of the big demand, the price shoot up. A lot of ocean freight goes between 300 to 600%. Shooting the pricing. So that's impacting everything and impacting even the food at the end. So it comes from the production to the value chain to transportation till the storage. It's impacting all this price. And these, private sector cannot do much here. I think government and international organizations should interfere, and even the private sector should be supported in different ways. Many governments put a lot of incentive schemes here, but that should be continued, and we should understand where the bottlenecks exactly and how we tackle it and how we cool down the prices, because On the long term, this is not in a favor of anyone. To have also inflation by 8% in the United States, according to February numbers, that's impacting everyone. And to continue like this in Europe and America and maybe in Asia, that will have a serious issues on the midterm and the long term.
Mr. Matiangi, Minister, you talked about how you agree with what President Biden is doing, bringing manufacturing back home. The thing is, the World Bank says if the developed world were to bring manufacturing back home, if China were to bring manufacturing back home, it will essentially mean 52 million more people living below the poverty line, and that may impact Africa.
Well, there's no country anywhere on earth that can operate and live as an island on its own. We need each other. Onshoring, if in and on its own, as a very basic approach to the challenges we face, will not work. But we must adopt a multiplicity of approaches where we privilege onshoring, yes, but at the same time we ensure and invest in developing local capacities. How are we going to develop the resilience and use of resources we have in our countries if countries, for example, in the South are just going to be net importers, as it were? I mean, the truth of the matter is that if there is anything we have learned, for example, those of us in the South, if there's anything we have learned in the economic South, in Africa, what we have learned about this pandemic is that by and large, in many respects, especially in the health sector and so on, we are net importers, net consumers of goods that are manufactured elsewhere. Yet we have capabilities and resources to do some of those within our countries. When you look at it on the other hand, the sad reality that we have to come to terms with is that we are also exporters of skills and services to the north and to other parts of the world. So the question is, it's adopting a very pragmatic way of addressing our challenges at the moment. Develop as much as possible the capacities we have, especially in the economic South, as we go forward. Take as much advantage as possible of the opportunities that exist next door, for example, in the Gulf, and then build relations that matter in terms of growing our economies. We cannot continue in this manner where we are expecting, for example, PPEs on the continent from China. All our people will die next time we have a problem, or where we expect, all PPEs from South Korea or whatever the case may be. We will not develop all the capacities we have overnight. But over a period of time, there must be a rethink on our manufacturing strategy, our supply chain management strategies, and most importantly, government and business relationships, especially on the continent. I am talking specifically on the African continent. In the absence of that, we will not be able to develop sufficient resilience to deal with the challenges that we face. We cannot be net importers because all our population will be wiped out if we are waiting for PPEs from China or we are waiting for PPEs from South Korea. Yet there is capacity within the continent to develop manufacturing capability to do that. Yet there is capacity in the Gulf region to develop capacities to do that kind of thing. So what is it that we need to do to grow the skills and the services that we have? I do not agree with the World Bank that if we are going to take on these challenges, we are going to increase numbers of those poor people. No, we are going to enhance our economies. We are going to strengthen. How we survived, many of us, for example, in Kenya, how our economy survived is because our private sector was very deeply involved in working with the government to address the challenges that we were facing. And we learned a new reality that actually government needs private sector even more than private sector needs government when it comes to providing goods and services to its people. So we have to rethink the configuration of relations between government and private and business. We have to rethink our policies on management and manufacturing and supply chain activities as we move forward. I do not agree that we be a society that is heavily dependent on manufacturing hubs hundreds of, or thousands of miles away. And so when something goes wrong and China shuts down, then we all shut our businesses. It can't work.
Rethink, reimagine as we move towards a new kind of globalization. On that note, I'd like to thank Ahmad, Minister Matiangi, Mr. Ahmed. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you.
Thank you.